Hello viewers! Do you sometimes have trouble starting your car where nothing happens when you turn the key? While it's most likely you'll blame this on a dead battery or a broken starter motor, the issue might be something as simple as a relay. And by that, I mean the starter relay, which is often forgotten in situations like these. So let's see what this thing does. Because the starter relay is responsible for the starter's engagement, I shall explain this in detail a bit later, it's pretty obvious this is the area where you might expect to see problems if it fails. Typically, when the starter relay dies, you won't hear that familiar cranking sound when you turn the key, and consequently, the car won't start. Sure, this can be because of a flat battery, but if the rest of the vehicle's electrics are working fine, the problem is probably down to the starter. One thing that mustn't be overlooked here is the starter relay, because if it's bad, the starter will not engage when the key is turned. It's the same with the newer cars that use a start button, as this system also uses a relay. On the other hand, a bad starter relay can cause the starter to remain on even once the car has started. What happens here is that you turn the key and the engine cranks and starts, but when you release the key, the starter remains on, generating a nasty whining noise. This is because the starter's gear is grinding against the flywheel, which is now turning fast when the engine is running, and such an operation can quickly damage both the starter motor and the flywheel, resulting in additional expenses. While the starter motor usually either works as it should or doesn't work at all, it can also sometimes cause intermittent starting issues. In other words, one time the car will start just fine, but the other nothing happens when you turn the key, and it might take several attempts before the starter finally kicks in. The reason for this might be dirt contamination or excessive heat inside the relay, which prevents it from transmitting electrical power to the starter. Also, loose or corroded wire connectors might have the same effect. You may also hear clicking noises when turning the key in the ignition. While this usually happens when the battery is low on charge, it can also be caused by a bad starter relay if it can't send the full power through. Still, this is not that common, because the relays operate on an all-or-nothing basis, meaning it's either going to fully send the electrical current or it won't send anything at all. But in some cases, such as when the relay is damaged, it may send only a portion of electricity, causing a clicking sound when you attempt to turn the key. Lastly, I must mention battery drainage, which can happen because of a bad starter relay if it's stuck in a partially on position. While this might not be enough to engage the starter, it can act as a parasitic drain that will flatten out the battery when the car is not running. The starter relay is responsible for sending high amperage current to the starter motor, and it also powers up the starter solenoid, which then pushes the starter's gear to engage the flywheel and crank the engine. When the key in the ignition is turned to the start position, the electrical power gets sent from the switch to the starter relay. This generates an electromagnetic field inside it, which then flips a mechanical switch and closes the circuit, allowing the high amperage current to flow from the battery to the starter's motor terminal, which then engages. And when the key is released, the electromagnetic field inside the relay shuts off, effectively killing the switch and cutting off the power supply to the starter. The reason why the battery and the starter aren't wired directly through the ignition switch is the amount of amperage needed for the starter's operation, which is too high for such a configuration. Instead, the ignition switch acts as a remote control, while the starter relay actually controls the flow of electricity. In most cases, you'll find the starter relay somewhere under the hood, either inside the fuse box or in some general area near the starter. What you're looking for is a small plastic box with some thick wires coming out of it. In older cars, the relay usually looks like this: a metal cylinder, usually bolted to the firewall. Sometimes you'll find this component inside a cabin fuse box, although this is not that common. And in some cases, like here, it might be in the trunk, especially if that's where the battery is located. Anyways, if you're having trouble finding the starter relay in your car, try to get a service manual for it or leave the question in the comment section below. Someone will probably get back with an answer. Generally speaking, the starter relay is a simple component, and as such, it usually isn't very expensive. In most cases, you can buy it brand new for around 20 or 30 bucks, although they might cost a bit more for some cars. It's much the same when it comes to replacing the starter relay, as this only involves unplugging a couple of wires and undoing a pair of nuts or bolts that hold it in place. To be honest, the hardest part here might be finding the relay's exact location and gaining sufficient access, because it might be hidden behind other components inside the engine bay. But still, this is a fairly easy job that you can do on your own with a ratchet and suitable socket. On the other hand, if you choose to have this done by a mechanic, this shouldn't take more than 50 bucks out of your pocket. Whenever there's a problem starting the car, what most people will do is use jumper cables to borrow some electricity from another vehicle. This, however, won't help if the starter relay is bad, because it doesn't let the electricity toward the starter. But what might work here is using the jumper cable to manually connect the battery and the starter, which effectively bypasses the broken starter relay. Still, keep in mind that this is not a simple procedure, and you must be extremely careful while performing it. Also, the starter motor in most cars is difficult to get to, so it might not be possible to do this by the side of the road. Another thing you can try here is bypassing the starter relay with a jumper wire, which in essence is a piece of wire used to connect the wire coming from the battery and the one that goes to the starter motor. This sends electrical current directly to the starter motor, allowing it to crank the engine. But again, caution is necessary here, as bypassing the starter relay might result in additional damage, especially if done improperly. If suspecting the starter relay is bad, there are several ways you can verify this. One is to have a helper turn the key or press the start button and listen carefully for a characteristic clicking sound coming from the relay. If there isn't one, it's quite likely the starter relay is broken. Still, this isn't the most precise method, and if you want to be absolutely sure, I'd recommend using a multimeter to measure the voltage at the relay's terminals. Set the multimeter to DC voltage, then connect the probes to the relay's input and output terminals. When the ignition is turned on, the relay should read the same voltage as the battery. A low reading or no readings at all suggests a faulty relay that isn't properly closing the circuit. Lastly, what I want to explain is the difference between the starter relay and the starter solenoid. The relay manages the flow of electricity from the battery to the solenoid, while the solenoid is responsible for actually engaging the starter motor with the engine's flywheel. In most cars, the relay and solenoids are separate, although some systems integrate them into one component. And that would be all about the starter relay. What it does, how to tell if it's broken, and how much it will cost to replace it. I hope this video was helpful, and if so, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. But if your car isn't cranking even after checking the starter relay, something else might be causing the issue. So to continue troubleshooting, check out other videos here or visit our site mechanicbase.com for detailed automotive repair guides. Bye!